Hi again. Today we return to books about special operations with this book, Ghost Force, The Secret History of the SAS by Ken Connor. Ken Connor served 23 years with the SAS, mainly in D Squadron. And in the introduction he makes the point that most histories of the regiment had been written either by writers such as Tony Geraghty or by senior officers such as DLB. And at the time of writing the book, there were relatively few books written by the guys who served in the ranks or NCOs. And he says this is important because they are really the actual continuity of the regiment, and officers who serve for initially a couple of years as a troop commander, some of them come back as a squadron commander for another couple of years, usually about 3 years, and a select few get to be invited back to either be the commanding officer or on the staff. And it's the NCOs, those senior NCOs who run the departments in the SAS, who are privy to all the actual operational details and secrets. And that referring to documents doesn't necessarily give you the whole picture, because they're usually sanitized after an operation and very few details were remaining. Particularly with a lot of the work they were doing was highly sensitive and secret. So for someone who served for 23 years to write a comprehensive history really does shine a light on the regiment in a way that really hasn't been done before. Also, he doesn't actually say this, but officers tend to avoid criticising each other, and they all had glorious careers, and that's not always the case. So in the book he does point the finger where it's needed. So in preparation for this review I reread the book, and I was really taken by how interesting he writes about the initial development of the regiment in Malaya, the Malayan Scouts. And they took a mixed bag of guys who happened to be out there in the Far East, some good, some very doubtful, as a squadron, then brought a load of guys over from England who were in the TA 21 SAS, which had been stood up after the war, purely reserve unit. They came over and with no jungle experience, well, most of them didn't, and from a very inauspicious beginning they developed the methodology which made the SAS what it is. By patrolling for 3 months at a time in the jungle and the swamps of Malaya, and that was done on a 3-year cycle, so they do 3 months in, a couple of weeks out, 3 months in. That was a 3-year cycle before they got leave back overseas. So by necessity they pushed the boundaries. They did what the army didn't believe could be done, long-range self-sustaining patrolling, and developed the skills necessary. Obviously, to get information back to their base, they needed to be able to have good communication, so signallers, more signallers. They didn't have access to medical facilities, so they had to have medical training, and they had to interact with the locals, and also if they captured prisoners for interrogation. So language became became a priority. And then the combination of medic and language was the foundation of the Hearts and Minds, where they helped the indigenous people, and they became an invaluable ally, and obviously that was used all over the world. And the ability to do those operations in the jungle under the most adverse conditions identified qualities that carried on into other theatres. And so it remains that jungle phase is still an essential part of SAS selection. It's really, as Lofty said to me, we don't use psychiatrists, we use the jungle. So the book, Ken Connor discusses every campaign from Malaya onwards to the First Gulf War. That's where the book ends. In tremendous detail, he lays out the reasons, the geopolitics behind what was happening, and then discusses the SAS involvement. He also talks about how the SAS was reorganised to meet different demands, how the troop system evolved, where you had the 4 troops, each with an entry specialty: air, boat, mobility and mountain. Working with American Special Forces, what they gained from that, and how they developed their own specialised equipment, their own ops research to find out suitable equipment and kit for their own particular roles. Particularly interesting to me, and I guess to a lot of you watching this, is where he discusses the specialised CQB, close quarter battle, that was developed to complement or support the bodyguard role and the counter-terrorist role. And a lot of this was down to a soldier, an NCO called Alex Spence. He was a small Scottish guy who was outstandingly fit, physically fit, tremendously interested in all the martial arts and in shooting. And he really was the driving force for this. It was helped by the fact that in D Squadron, the squadron commander, John Slim, was also very much interested in CQB and actually wrote a paper on the shooting methods. But another character who was mentioned is Michael Bentin. Now, Michael Bentin was the president of the United Kingdom Practical Shooting Association when I was a member of it, and I knew him as one of the Goons, the comedy group, who were the funniest comedy group in British history, in my opinion. I've already reviewed Spike Milligan's books. He was the writer for the Goons, and that's where I knew him from. He was a comedian. But evidently I heard on the grapevine that he was really interested in shooting. Anyway, in the book it explains he'd been a member of, I think it was the Peruvian Secret Service, and was highly adept with the pistol, and had a lot of ideas. So much so that they actually brought him to Hereford and picked his brains. So his contribution is acknowledged. And Ken Connor talks about in the early days of developing counter-terrorism, they did a get-together at Biggin Hill Airfield in Kent, where they were experimenting with the use of dogs, police dogs. Now, obviously later on, military working dogs have proved to be invaluable in Afghanistan and Iraq, but these were early experiments. And what they did, they had this particularly fierce attack dog, and it was an aircraft hijack situation. They had an old aircraft fuselage which was up on trestles. So they put all the VIPs guys from the government, from the spooks and everything on the aircraft, had a role player, and at a certain point loaded the dog on board, and he started biting everyone. So everyone got out of seats and rushed to the tail end of the aircraft, whereupon it tilted off the trestles. Everyone slid down in a heap with the dog on top biting everyone. The two SAS observers had very, very wisely declined to enter the aircraft and stood holding their ribs laughing at this sight. And another activity that Ken Connor was involved in was training personnel for the DET, 14th Int, and he was instrumental in the training of the first women into the DET, who became an invaluable asset in the surveillance role over in Northern Ireland. He talks at the end of the book about the Gulf War and points a lot of fingers. One of the points he makes was that G Squadron had been sent out to do desert training. They shut down in the desert and got it off to a T, came back and were put onto the SP team role. And A Squadron was sent out with no prior training. And it was internal politics of the squadrons, apparently, because A Squadron had missed out on the Falklands. They were the team, the SP team, back in the UK, while the others went off to the Falklands. And to redress this, they lobbied and got the job. No logic other than that. Also, what was originally a 1-squadron deployment turned into a 3-squadron deployment, but really with no additional material. So everybody's running around scrabbling for kit. This is one of the reasons why Bravo 20 and the 3 Bravo patrols had such problems in getting ammunition and explosives, claymores and stuff, because there just wasn't any around. The squadrons that deployed A and D, which each deployed in half-squadron groups, hadn't been allowed to do their own forward recce's because there was a cell within 22 which was given the task, which was totally against SOPs at the time, mapping. When they took some prisoners or dead bodies, they discovered that the Iraqi maps were far better than what the SAS had, despite the fact that the Iraqis don't have their own dedicated mapping setup. The UK leads the world in it, and as Ken Connor said, you can go into a specialist shop in London and buy very, very detailed maps of the area. They didn't do this. Also, they declined the chance of using very, very detailed satellite photographs that the Americans would have provided them. This was due to OPSEC. Now, everyone and his dog knew that the SAS were going to be operating in Iraq. It was in all the newspapers, and it was very speculative, and they'd be dressed as shopkeepers and all sorts of things. So, I mean, it wasn't a secret that had they gone to our American allies, who were running the war actually, and said we need mapping of the entire Iraq, how's that an OPSEC compromise? He talks about the sacking of the officer commanding A Squadron, who was actually an SBS officer, and queries why this had to be done, because A Squadron had actually achieved the first real successes in the war. And he also talks about the famous mess meeting that was called when the squadrons got together and for a resupply, and the RSM called for a mess meeting of sergeants and WO1's Warrant Officers Mess Committee, and there was a photograph taken of it, and then paintings were done. And Ken Connor reckons that this was just theatre, that it was kind of a bit of an ego exercise, shall we say. So obviously Ken Connor's in a position to point the finger, and the book goes into many more aspects, the Falklands and Borneo, Aden, Northern Ireland in tremendous detail, and fairly thick read, every page worth reading, terrific book. And okay, there's been some more biographies done since, but there's nothing really that gives you the whole overall view from the inside in such a manner. Terrific book, and you should read it.